Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And some of you are probably reading the title and saying, well, about time, because I know for sure we have some flat earthers, some FEers of different kinds. So this is the show for you. And you might be a skeptic, or you might be like, you guys are crazy. And this show is still for you. So stick around, guys. We got, of course, Mark Sargent with us today. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well, and thank you so much for inviting me today.
No, no, thanks for coming on, man. Like I've been following you for a little bit, and like I said, I first heard of you a while back, a couple of years ago, black back before any of this was a big, huge thing, and it's kind of turned into you could say a phenomenon, of
Yeah,
sorts, and it's really taken off.
yeah.
And let's get right to it, Mark.
hmm
Tell me a little bit about you. What's going on? Who is this
Who,
Mark
who,
Sargent?
who am I? I am just a guy who grew up in the Northwest. I was born and raised in Seattle, and started my career playing video games for a living. All the way back in the mid '90s, when
Whoa.
yeah, I know, when there was not a lot of people playing video games for a living. I won a pinball world tournament back in '94, and the publisher that was out of Boulder, Colorado, decided they were going to hire me. And so I flew out to Boulder, Colorado. I'd never been to Colorado before, and I stayed there for 20 years. Played video games for the first few years, and then after that, I taught proprietary software for various startup companies in Boulder all the way until, oh boy, 2014, pushing 2015. And that's when I kind of got into the flat earth stuff. Initially, I started out as a conspiracy guy, but not hardcore, not tinfoil hat, pull the blinds and never go out of your house type of thing. But I knew about all of them. I was old enough to where I started way back when JFK was the movie came out in the theater back in the early '90s, and up until then, I really didn't believe in anything. I grew up on a sheltered island north of Seattle, to where I didn't even think the people in authority would ever lie. I thought things were as
Right,
advertised.
right.
And then I went into I got bored. I knew I had opinion on just about every floor that's going to start cranking up here pretty soon. Some,
No
some
worries.
landscapers. It's like it's gonna get ugly.
Gotcha.
Um, so I was bored with conspiracies. I'd seen it and heard it all and had an opinion on just about every conspiracy you could think of. And everybody knows out there, everybody has heard about flat earth. That's what makes it so beautiful, is that you don't have to. I have yet to run into a person where when you tell them about flat earth and they say, what, never heard of it. No, everybody's heard of it and everybody hates it to start with, and I hated it too. In 2014,
Yeah.
it's in the it's again, it's the DVD you got for Christmas. You're never gonna watch. It's the last book on the shelf. You're never ever gonna read it, and it was sitting there always bugging me. When I was going through conspiracies, it was just, there was not much in 2014 on flat Earth, and I saw this little video by a guy in Germany about how the flight paths were screwed up in the southern hemisphere and they didn't make sense. And it was all in German, but I got the gist of it, where he was saying that it only makes sense if the world was actually flat, where the North Pole's at the center and all the continents are splayed outward, and really all the oceans, we were just this puddle in the middle of a giant vast field. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. I don't like it. I still think flat Earth sucks, but all
Right.
right, I'll go down this road a little bit.
Yeah.
So then I watched a video by a Canadian guy who says he went to a NASA party down in the East Coast of the United States, and that if you hear some background noise, it's going to end here pretty soon.
No, no worries.
Thank
I also live next to an airport.
you. Yeah. So. Oh, seriously, dude, get the heck out of here! Oh my god. So the next thing I started digging. I said, okay, I'm going to spend a weekend on this. I'm just going to shut it down. Should not be hard to do. It's flat Earth, right? How hard could it be to stomp this thing out? And
Right.
everybody thinks this. Fast forward to about 9 months later, in the beginning of 2015, February of 2015 to be exact, And I wake up in the middle of the night, and I can't solve it. It's a freaking puzzle I cannot solve. I cannot prove the globe in a court of law anymore. And I had that weird Jerry Maguire moment where I woke up and said, okay, I'm going to go the other way with this. I'm going to, because I can't solve it myself, and I know the internet hive mind is very, very good and very thorough. So I made a series of videos called the Flat Earth Clues. And it was basically a cry for help. And put it out on the internet. I made one every day for I did 7 in 8 days, and put them out there. And I thought for sure an academic was going to shoot it down, and they didn't. And then all of a sudden, people started calling. And where you kind of ran into it was I had people starting wanting to interview me, which was weird. It's like, okay, I mean, everything was unsolicited. I didn't have to call anybody. People were going, "This is the most amazing thing ever. Tell me more," right? I'm going, okay. So I started talking about it, and one of the people that called me early on was Canary Cry.
Right.
And I didn't know who these guys were, and some other people. As I'm getting into this more and more, and the circles are getting bigger and bigger, it's like, oh wow, you got on Canary Cry. I'm going, is that good? You know,
is that good?
I didn't know. I mean, other than Coast to Coast, which they called me in the first 3 months, I had no idea. In fact, the Coast to Coast interview was even more bizarre. They called me up, the producer, and said, "Okay, what's your pitch? You know, what are you selling here?" I go, what are you talking about? And she goes, "Well, what's this angle?" And I go, "Whatever." She goes, no, like, what's your DVD? I go, I don't have a DVD. She goes, how about your book? I don't have a book. She goes, okay. And she's starting to get irritated. She goes, how about your website? I'm going, and I was really embarrassed at that point. I was going, look, I don't have anything. I just have a YouTube channel. I don't have a website yet. I just started this. And she goes, why am I talking to you? And I go, you called me. You called me. Why? She goes, all right, give me 5 minutes. Give me your best pitch. And I go, all right. So I gave her the nickel tour. And that was the end. She's like, all right, we'll have you on next week. And it's like, okay, that's good, right? So, and it just started steamrolling. In fact, I remember Rob Skiba's story, because he tells me, he does that. It's part of his thing now, where he says in 2015 how I ruined his life, because he was making some road trip and he heard the Canary Cry thing and he listened to it twice and then called me and says, well, I'm gonna shut this guy down. And then I get on his show, and then he becomes probably one of the biggest Christian advocates in the community, to where I just spent some time with him down in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago when that we were doing the National Geographic thing. So anyway, that's the kind of the short version of how I came to be where we are now. And things just started steamrolling after that, to where the clues are 3 years old. And it is monstrous, the response that's out there. Heck, I just watched last night. I know this is kind of, anticlimactic, but last night where they had the NBA draft, and the people that the Celtics chose, or the guy that the Celtics chose for Kyrie Irving, because Kyrie Irving's really big into this. His first tweet, literally to the team, was, "The Earth is flat." It's like, oh wow, this is really, really something. So
this is interesting, and well, let's take it back a little bit. You said about the Flat Earth Clues, exactly. And people in this show, we have some of the listeners from Canary Cry, and we also have just our own listeners that we've gathered and stuff like that. And so, what exactly does that entail? Like, can you kind of run us through exactly the Flat Earth Clues, and if you think you have found something more interesting, or maybe to add on to it?
Yeah. What I did was, initially when I was looking at the Flat Earth theory, I thought it had some merit, but it was not boiled down far enough for the average person on the street. There was a lot of content out there for Flat Earth. I mean, enough, I should say. Between 2014 and the beginning of 2015, there was several people that were putting forth a bunch of content, but not if you had to give somebody a spiel like a nickel tour, there wasn't a dummies guide. And so what I did was I made the first 11 clues pretty quickly, and they were basically connect the dots. There was no math, very little science. It was kind of connect. It was kind of like a variation of an old British television show called Connections, where I said, okay, this leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to this, and eventually all these things point at Flat Earth. where, and I don't want to go over it in great detail because it would take too long,
Right.
but what I basically said was that, look, I believe that we don't live on a spinning ball anymore. We've never lived on a spinning ball. We live in a giant building, a giant Hollywood backlot, a structure with walls and a floor and a ceiling. And it's so huge, so massive, that even our best and brightest didn't know for sure until about 1960 what exactly it looked like. It was that big. And we'd sent our best explorers. Basically, the gist was that we knew about it. The powers that be knew about it hundreds of years ago. But what are you going to do? Let's say, again, say you're the king of Spain in 1500, right? You've got wooden ships and some horses. What exactly are you going to do? Your exploration limits are really restrained. And so it really wasn't until the internal combustion engine came out at the beginning of the 1900s that we were really able to do anything, mostly with aircraft. And our aircraft advancement really, really ramped up fast. I mean, considering, the Wright brothers and all those other early tests were done, 1900 something. By the time we had the 1920s, we had some decent planes. And so we sent our best guys up to the North Pole in 1926. The most notable one is Admiral Richard E. Byrd. And then, again, out of the blue, from 1928 until his death in 1957, he was sent to the South Pole, or the Antarctic region, and he just flew in the Antarctic region looking for something, whatever it was. And I again connected the dot and say, I think he was looking for the outer marker. Whereas he got to the North Pole, and whatever he found at the North Pole indicated that this was some sort of building, some sort of terrarium, planetarium, God's footstool, whatever you want to call it, snow globe.
So if people want to put something visual to it, you're saying something like the movie The Truman Show.
Yeah, something like the Truman Show, but much, much bigger. And if the Truman Show was really just a giant sports stadium without the seats.
Right.
And we've seen this in various science fiction movies, and even the biblical models, they looked sort of like that. It's kind of like a snow globe type thing, but the outer marker, they didn't know where it was. And so he flew around for the better part of 30 years. He flew his own planes, military missions. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were down there. And they took a small break during World War II and then picked it back up right after World War II ended. And then his last mission was in 1955, 1956. It was called Operation Deep Freeze. And that's when, and I said in the clues, he finds the outer marker, the outer region, the wall, the side wall, this thing. And it had to have been thousands of miles from the Antarctic coastline. People say, oh, the edge is the Antarctic. No. The Antarctic coastline is just the beginning of the edge. The edge is so far out there. Again, our best pilots with 30 years couldn't find it. And then once he found it, that's when the world changed. And it was hidden within our normal history to where it was just glossed over. What in real quick succession, and Skiba talked about this a little bit, was in so let's say they found the outer marker in 1956, 1957. Immediately, the Antarctic Treaty was started to be drafted. 1958, they start launching atomic weapons, the United States and Soviet Union, straight up, trying to break through it, because that's what men would do. If you find a barrier, it's like, well, maybe how do we get through this? NASA's formed after the first 3 shots of those atomic tests. The Antarctic Treaty is put into place in 1959, which says that no corporation in the world can set up shop in Antarctica ever. It's the only unbroken treaty in the history of treaties. It's not even up for review until the year 2041.
Right. And speaking on that,
yeah,
I don't know if you've looked at the rules and regulations as to someone like me, that's just nobody, who wants to go over there, which is likely not going to happen.
Right.
But if and when that does happen, just to submit the application can cost like millions of dollars or something like that.
Yeah, and you have to go
and that's just to submit it, not even to there's still chances that you pay that money and get declined.
Right.
And so you have to send it. Okay, you have to send it to every country that's part of the Antarctic Treaty, and every country has to approve you going over there,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
it was amazing. Yeah, Rob did a reprint of a guy who went through the whole treaty with a fine tooth comb, and
right,
he was even saying, no, it's worse than you can even imagine.
right.
You think the treaty's bad? No, it's really it's a bureaucratic nightmare.
Right, and then we bring that up to say because most people would say, well, first of all, most people that kind of never give it the time of day would say, well, how come no one's falling off the edge or whatever, because
Yeah,
they
yeah,
assume that there's an edge,
yeah,
and then the other thing is like, why don't we just go down there and explore Antarctica,
yeah.
and obviously they don't know about the Antarctic Treaty,
No,
so
no, they don't. And again, this is not to say, and I mentioned it in the clues, is not to say that you can't go down to Antarctica. If you want to spend, the $15,000 and go down to Antarctica, you absolutely can do it. You'll go to the coastline, the peninsula. You'll have your picture taken with penguins. You'll go out on those bright orange rafts and you wear those, ridiculously glowingly red outfits. And that's what you'll do. It's one of the most expensive trips you can ever take, considering what you're doing out there. But as a corporation, you cannot do anything. You're saying, okay, what does that mean? What I mean is, think about it from a resource standpoint, where if you're an oil company or oil and gas or minerals, any corporation that wants to go after the resources down there. Look, oil is not a cheap thing, right? If you want to ignore it back when it was $30 a barrel, that's one thing. But when it goes over $100 a barrel, people are going everywhere. People are going to start fracking in your backyard.
mhm.
And they aren't allowed to go down there. And not only that, that's where it gets weird. They're not even allowed to talk about it. That's where I think, because lobbying is the key to politics. Everybody's got their lobbying group and everybody greases the palms and they pay a lot of money for things. And yet the biggest corporations in the world are not allowed to even talk about it. They aren't allowed to lobby about it. It's probably under the guise of national security, where every CEO that runs British Petroleum and Exxon and all those companies, they're probably told, it's like, look, I know you want to go down there. You can't. If you try to go down there, we will bog you down with so much red tape. It will not be profitable for you ever. And that's when when all these things happened was when the world changed. When the Antarctic Treaty and the Van Allen radiation belts were announced in the exact same year, I kind of was like, okay, I see what you're doing here. Because one of the things I was kind of trained to do in my career was have empathy. Because I did a lot of customer service, a lot of phone work, some high stress level clients. And I tried to put myself in their shoes. And so when I was looking at this, I said, okay, what would I do if I wanted to not necessarily build the world? That's a whole nother thing. But what would I have to do to try to keep it a secret? If somebody did find out, if somebody did find the edge of the world, how would you keep it a secret? And every move that the governments made after 1956, I couldn't come up with a better option. It's like, oh yeah, that's clever. Yeah, I see what you did there. And sealing off the upper edge, sealing off the outer edge, making it ridiculously expensive to even explore that area, and then militarizing space. That was the other one, which was for the longest time. And you can say, well, no, there's SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and those companies now. I'm going, yeah, but what are they really doing? Plus they're completely infested with NASA engineers. They're hiring from the same pool of talent. That talent is mostly military. So it was just amazing to see. So that's what the clues were. These huge connect the dots thing where I put it out there. I say, look, I think all these things point to a flat Earth. Prove me wrong. And no one did. As a matter of fact, I had subject matter. I've got a long list of subject matter experts that came forward, all branches of the military, engineers, pilots, air traffic controllers, anybody that had to do with anything with transportation. The brass ring, the people that, of course, have not come forward because they'd be technically whistleblowers, would be somebody in NASA, somebody directly tied to aerospace. But of course, they wouldn't. But no academics were willing to step forward from any physical science branch of academia to stand against this. Even now, here we are 3 years later, and I cannot get someone. And I in fact, let me share a short story with you real quick. Earlier this year, I thought I had somebody, because I put a challenge out there called my declaration of war. I said, look, put me up against any panel at this point. I don't care who it is. I don't care what sort of degrees you have on the wall. I don't care if I'm outnumbered 10-1. Put me up against them. And a German television team said, okay, we got a guy out of a astrophysicist out of Georgetown, and would you? And I said, right on, let's do that. And so they said, okay, well, we're going to do it really compartmentalized. So you come up with 5 scientific-ish questions, and we're going to record you saying them on video, and we will play that video for him, and then he will record his own video, and you guys will be doing that. So it's not going to be live. I said, all right, that's fine. That works for me in that way. It's fair. We don't have to talk over each other. And so I came up with my 5 questions, and they sent the questions to him, and he folded like a card table immediately and said, yeah, I'm not doing this. That was it. That was the end of it. And I knew it. I picked my 5 best things out of all. In fact, most of them really weren't even tied to the clues, which was amazing. It was part of the community's thing that they came up with later. And yeah, here we are now, to where I just got back from Los Angeles, where National Geographic flew me out because there was a skeptics group that wanted to shoot some long distance photography, and they shot it in the worst place they ever could have done. But National Geographic, from a science standpoint, were very, very concerned about this. They know how big it's getting, and what really worried them was the U.gov report that came out just this year, where there was a British census taker group, scientific based, and they called up, I think, 9,000 Americans, and they were asking them, what they thought about the Earth being flat. And what was weird was that the 18 to 24-year-olds, about a third of them, they were on board with it. And that completely skewed the curve that they were looking for. No play on words there, where they were and science picked up on this, and then science was like, okay, don't know what's happening. Maybe it's a fluke, but whatever's happening, and they started blaming the education system and stuff like that. I'm going, no, it's because younger people are more pliable, and it's like, okay, if enough people say this and the evidence looks pretty good, yeah, hell, why not? And so, yeah, that's where we are. Sorry, that's my ramble.
No, you're fine. So let's go back a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about, you said, you presented to this astrophysicist, hey, this is what's up. Give me something back, Right. Can you talk about one of the things that you brought up? Because up until now,
I can give you all 5.
Because what I want to do is, like I said, for me, I'm very open to the idea of like, yeah, okay, first of all, my biggest thing is, to me, I'm a very big biblical context guy.
Sure.
That's kind of what the show's about.
Sure.
And one of the things that we talk about on the show that's a huge pet peeve of mine is when other people that believe in the Bible say the Bible says this when it doesn't say it.
Right.
And I'm very much against that. So
sure.
Even if it's not certain things that can be allegorical and certain things can be poetic, and I understand all those things,
right.
And there's other things that I bring up and say, look, this is meant for this is meant for that. And most people in the religious community that believe in the Bible get very triggered, like when you say, actually, the Bible, talks about a flat Earth enclosed system.
Sure.
And so, first and foremost,
do you want me to get into the biblical stuff? Because I don't mind. I mean, I can get into that first if you want me to, or do you want me to? Either way, I can give you my. Tell you what, let me rattle off the 5 points I threw at this professor real quick, and then
cool.
we'll segue into.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do because what I want to do is provide also obviously I'll provide the links, to any of the research that you have and things like that.
Sure.
But I want people to hear scientifically what's going on, like what can be empirically observed, and really just shown like this is what things look like. This is what science can actually teach you if you are doing
Sure.
empirical, if you're going based on empirical data. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And then from there, we can talk about how it's presented in the religious perspective.
Sure. In fact, I'll just read the 5 paragraphs for you guys, because normally I just give you the bullet points, but heck, let's do them. So this is what I read to the professor at Georgetown, and it's just 5 quick points. First, and not necessarily in order of importance, but because they're all pretty good. One is long distance photography. The mainstream science formula for the curvature of the Earth is 8 inches per mile squared. An easy comparison would be the falling rate of 32 feet per second per second. So 8 inches per mile per mile. 2 miles is 2 times 2 equals 4 times 8 inches, or 32. 3 miles is 3 times 3 equals 9 times 8 inches, or 72 inches, and so on. At 50 miles, the curvature is 50 times 50 times 8, coming in at over 1,600 feet of curvature. And yet, with HD cameras, we can pull boats back into frame that are well beyond visual range. Not only does the new technology clearly show that it's not a mirage, but the same objects can be viewed in infrared and can be targeted ship to ship by beam radar. Can science explain this? That's the first one. Second one is vacuum versus gravity. The force of a vacuum is measured in units of torr, T-O-R-R. Even a low-level vacuum can overcome gravity here on the surface. In building molecule-free chambers for the manufacturing of electronics, a series of massive pumps are needed to create a 99% vacuum environment, otherwise known as a -9 torr. And for the remaining 1%, horsepower isn't enough. It can only be achieved by a chemical leaching process. That being said, how is the -10 torr vacuum force of space not ripping off the atmosphere of this world? Gravity is a strong force as well, but remember that there are gases that already defy it, like helium, hydrogen, and fluorocarbons. Isn't it more logical to suggest that the atmosphere is being contained in an enclosed, pressurized system? It's number 2.
Yeesh.
I know, right?
That sounds as... I mean, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I know. If you're scientists, I mean, and it's an old question to science. Like, where is the bleeding edge of the atmosphere? Where does our atmosphere end and space begin? Because if you know anything about a vacuum, and I've got several guys on my show that were vacuum experts, they're going, look, the vacuum is no joke. It is the equalization of pressure. If you have a massive, massive, massive negative pressure in space, the atmosphere has no chance. None. I don't care what kind of gravity, unless it's a super gravity. All right, let's go into something. Let's do eclipse shadow. That's number 3. Mainstream science tells us that the moon is over 2,000 miles wide, and yet during the 2017 American eclipse, the moon's shadow was only 70 miles wide, a reduction of over 97%. This is the equivalent of having a 6-foot man walking in front of a wall where his shadow is smaller than an action figure at only 2 inches high. Where do we see this in our everyday lives? We've seen shadows actual size and some much larger. Where can we see small shadows? The Flat Earth community says the moon is less than 50 miles wide, much closer, and the same size as the sun. Isn't this explanation also possible? And I could even continue on that one. There was a variation of that, which is if the blackout zone for the moon was only 70 miles wide, then when the Earth passes in front of the sun, blocking out the moon, we should see a blackout zone on the moon. I mean, a total black spot of over 250 miles wide. And yet we just see a blood moon. We never see like a blood moon with a black spot. In fact, it'd probably have a cool name for it because it would look like this black eye in the middle of this red thing, and we never ever see it. Number 4, which is an interesting one that I didn't even believe in when I first saw it, the moon temperature. Science has yet to address the relatively new discovery that the moon generates a cold light. We all know that in the daytime, it's 90 degrees in the sunlight, 80 degrees in the shade, depending on conditions. However, at night, especially when the moon is high in the sky, we see the opposite. While it might be 50 degrees in the moonlight, it's warmer at 60 degrees in the moonshade, sometimes showing temperature shifts of over 13 degrees Fahrenheit. In addition, under controlled experiment conditions, magnified moonlight is even colder still. Again, the opposite of sunlight. We can generate this with technology today using a cold laser. The question is, why is the moon giving off a cold laser light?
Yeah, I actually tried this myself. When I heard that, I couldn't believe it, though. It was a simple experiment. It was a full moon, and I was waiting for the full moon right above us, straight above us. And what I had tried was like, okay, we have a bunch of little trees in my backyard.
Sure.
And so I stood in the moonshade, and the moonshade was warmer.
Yeah.
I stood in the moonlight, and it was colder.
And we've done some pretty neat tests where you use copper strips and water, and glasses of water. One was in the moonshade, one was in the moonlight, and one was under magnified moonlight. And I'll be darned, that magnified moonlight didn't even get colder. So, and when I first heard it, again, shows your conditioning. When I first heard it at the end of 2015, and I was into flat Earth, and somebody told me, they called into Strange World, and they said, "Hey, what about this cold light? Well, get out of here, cold moonlight, come on." But it's so easy. The thing is, what ruins everybody is it's so easy to test. I mean, you go to Home Depot and you buy a freaking point-and-click thermometer for infrared thermometer for like $20, not even $17.
Right.
And you throw in a 9-volt battery, and there you go. I mean, that's how Skiba's got a great video on that. Yeah. And the last but not least, number 5, is the Van Allen trap question. It is a simple yes or no question. Are the Van Allen radiation belts deadly? Yes or no? If yes, then how did Apollo 11 through Apollo 17 make round trips through these belts with only aluminum and plastic as shielding? No one died, no one got radiation poisoning, no one even got cancer. Radiation is only stopped by 2 metals, lead and gold. Both are very heavy and cannot be used in aerospace because of their weight. If the answer is no, the belts are not deadly, then explain the video currently on the NASA.gov website called Orion Trial by Fire, in which NASA clearly states the belts are so dangerous they will not be testing manned capsules because they are unable to solve the radiation problem. Keep in mind, this is not an old video. It was literally created at the end of 2014. And it's... I have yet to have anyone even shut any of these down. With the exception of long-distance photography, which they'll claim is a mirage or an illusion. And I'm going, okay, well, it's the most magical illusion ever. That's
the most high-def illusion ever.
Yeah, and it exists through any light conditions, just about any distance, any weather conditions, and any object. So it's a magical mirage that can exist through all those different situations. Sorry, not buying it.
Right.
Yeah, anyway.
So I'm sure you've seen the memes out there of like, these planets look like this, but Earth is flat for some reason, right? And then,
right.
And they show it in the center. So let's talk about that. What do you think about all the photography, all the pictures, all the proof we have of all these planets that are all round and their little moons and everything? And
well, anything that's, I'm sorry, we'll start with NASA and work our way backwards. Anything that's put out by NASA is an utter lie. There's nothing everything they've done has been fabricated, and people say, and I know it's going to be a shock to some people because they'll say that, well, the Apollo missions. I'm from America. I believe the Apollo missions were gospel. It's like, well, okay. Think of it this way: if you're going to protect this place, if you're going to try to keep this place a secret, what you really don't understand is that NASA was created. The entire reason they were created was to keep this thing under wraps for as long as they could. So any pictures that are released by NASA, they are created in a lab somewhere, a photo lab by somebody. That just get that out of the way. Now, as far as amateur astronomers go, and I have talked to several, they're very upset with me, where they say that, look, I've seen the moons of Jupiter, I've seen the rings of Saturn. I've seen, well, if you're looking from down here on the ground, you're seeing a blurry, fuzzy little thing of light. And you may be able to take a picture of it. It does look like there's Saturn with rings around it and Jupiter with moons around it. And I say, okay, go to a planetarium, take a pair of binoculars with you. Look at Jupiter in the planetarium. Does it look more or less real? And they'll say, well, it's not the same thing. You're in a building. You're in a projection. Who's to say that when you walk out of that building, you're just not in a much, much bigger building? All we're talking about is scale here. I'm saying that what you're looking up in the sky are very, very pretty lights. If you want to say they're luminaries, that's one thing. It doesn't really matter. What I'm saying is they're not immense objects that are thousands, if not millions of light years away. They're very, very close, and they are part of an enclosed system, which is why I named the website enclosedworld.com.
Okay. So, what about the wonderful imagery and videos that we have of us landing on Mars, Mark? What about those,
Yeah, the Mars project. Well, I mean, the manned project called Orion, that's going to be kicked down the road until our civilization comes to a halt. But the Mars rover, that one is super fun for me because it defies even just regular old mechanical engineering. You remember, in fact, I was thinking about this just recently because I had a friend's car battery go dead. Your average person on the street doesn't realize that the car batteries have a shelf life of about six years. So when you get a new car, your battery is going to go in 6 years. And what I mean is after about 6 years, maybe pushing 7, the battery eventually will not be able to take a charge anymore. You cannot jump it. It is dead, super dead. It's just a giant piece of rock at that point. You cannot do anything with it. It's an anchor. And there's nothing you can do. And yet the Mars rover, which apparently is still running after, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years. I'm not even sure anymore what year they're up to. This battery it just keeps going. And remember, this is not a gas engine rover. This thing's completely electric powered. It's completely dependent on this battery. And it's just running around. In fact, there was a point where they had lost contact with it for an entire year. And then they rebooted something, and now it's back and doing its own thing. It's ridiculous. Any footage that's taken near Saturn, anything that's taken near Mars, it's all part of a giant subtext. They don't even care if you watch the headlines. Read the article. All they care about is if you glance at the headline and maybe look at the picture, because it's all the same thing, which is, oh, hey, by the way, there might be a face on Mars. Hey, there might be a hexagon on Saturn. Hey, we're reclassifying Pluto. Oh, look, here's Jupiter's moon. Could there be life on it? It doesn't matter. All those stories are, the headlines aren't really important as long as you remember one thing. You're in space. Face on Mars because you're on a globe. Saturn, globe. Jupiter, globe. Pluto, you're on Earth. The whole thing. It's the same thing. It's reinforced space. That's all it's doing, because you got to remember, up until the first blue marble shot of Earth, which was the only disc picture that was taken for 43 years, there was no actual evidence that you were on Earth. The only thing that anyone ever had was those stupid plastic globe models that were sitting in our classrooms for years and years and years and years. That's all anybody had. And eventually, sooner or later, somebody had to take the picture of the Earth, because you had to show somebody before the military subcontractors started getting involved. People that actually could build rockets that could go up that high. But you can't just hand the picture of the Earth to people, because what's the first question they're going to ask? How'd you take the picture? So you had to create, based on your military technology, you had to create a space program to at least give the impression that you could get high enough to take the picture. That part was brilliant, and then they made the mistake of trying to milk that picture for 43 years, and wasn't until we started getting involved in 2015 that they released the second picture. 43 years, one picture taken of Earth. Look it up. It's amazing.
Okay. All right. Well, how about, and again, I'm just asking, trying to be the devil's advocate here, because that was what Omar was here for.
I understand.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what about what's going on with the footage we get from like the ISS?
Same thing. In fact, the ISS is even worse production value. I shouldn't say worse. Apollo was bad, but it was good for the 60s. They missed a lot of big things, and they glossed over some things that the general public didn't catch. Like, for example, let's back up to Apollo real quick. Several things that weren't there. One was the stars in the background. We say, oh, that's exposure technology, and how the camera's set. And it's like, okay, fine. Everybody, though, in the conspiracy world knows you can't show the stars, because remember, the stars move, and you have date timestamps for when the astronauts were supposedly doing things. If the belt of Orion is in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're going to catch it. So their answer was, you know what, let's just make the whole thing black, the whole sky. Two would be the shadows, intersecting shadows in the moon. That never happened. The blast crater, that didn't happen. I'm sorry, no, intersecting shadows that were there. Everything should be parallel, but they were like, there was multiple light sources. The blast crater that didn't show up, even though there was like 10,000 pounds of thrust on this ashy area. There wasn't a speck of dust on anything. No feats of strength. The vertical leap, remember, it's a 180-pound man that supposedly weighs 30 pounds. It should have been like that Disney movie where he goes to Mars and he's jumping, huge distances. White man can jump on the moon, and they didn't. They jumped a little bit. Come on, if you weighed 30 pounds, you could do amazing things. You could lift that freaking rover with one hand if you wanted to.
Right.
But going back to the ISS, there's so many things wrong with the production value of the ISS. First off would be the technical component, where, because you're in a vacuum, and yet we're talking basically of an airline casing, aluminum and plastic. The power of a vacuum would rip that thing to shreds. There's a reason why submarines are reinforced to such a degree because of crush depth. A submarine gets down so far, and then it can only go so deep because eventually the pressure gets to it, and that's working from the outside in. Think of the reverse version of that, where the power of the vacuum pressure difference would shred that thing. It would just blow that thing apart. I had an industrial valve and seal guy that came on and said, "Look, why aren't they shutting the doors? Between compartments." You realize that even if this thing was real, a micrometeor the size of a nickel punches through that hole, everybody's dead instantly. It's not like the movies where it's like, there's an air leak, somebody get the duct tape, and start running around. You don't have time. You literally would exit. It would suck all the air out of that thing and your lungs instantly. It would, in a fraction of a second, it'd be over. And yet there's no doors. Everyone's gliding around in their khakis and their polo shirts and socks. Why
khakis and their
they are? That's what they're doing. They're smiling.
No, I've seen them, and that's where I was going to bring it up.
Yeah.
Is I've seen a lot of videos from the ISS where they're like, "Hey, check it out, guys," and they send them to schools and say, "Look, we're in space, kids,"
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of and if you know a little bit about how CGI works and things like that, and then there's been a lot of malfunctions where you can either see the green or the blue screen depending on which one they're using in the background, and as they move, it'll lose the image for a minute, and sometimes you could even see their harnesses on their belts.
There's a great video by a guy named Mike Helmick who loved, again, it only takes one guy to start breaking down the footage, and he showed a thing where they were obviously watching CGI monitors, and a guy was flipping a hat, just a baseball hat, and the guy next to him was supposed to grab the hat, switch it to his other hand, and put it off on the side, on the wall. And he did exactly that. The thing was, he missed the hat. The hat was still there, floating in space, and for some reason there was a glitch, and which is why you never ever do it live.
Right.
You never do these, even today. This is the same thing going back in show business forever. You don't do these productions live. And I know sometimes they have to because they're talking to news people or they're talking to school kids. But it was horrible. It was the most glaring thing I've ever seen. That, and of course, if you want to have simple fun, look up something called ISS hairspray, which is in order to maximize the appearance of 0G, you got to do some fun stuff with the women's hair. But at the same time, it's like, I wouldn't have gone that way. I would have had to pull their hair back, put a hat on them, a nice NASA hat,
right, or
whatever hat you have lying around. Or, I don't know, cut everyone's hair super, super short so the filters don't get clogged up. Because in 0G, hair would be like it would be in a swimming pool. People would be walking through hair particles all the time. It'd be awful. But no, instead they permed the hair straight up. And it looked ridiculous, and you could bounce a quarter off their hair. It was, and it was embarrassing. It was stuff that even your B and C list directors in Hollywood would never get caught doing. I don't know why they were doing it, but all those things were just amazing to watch. And at the same time, we realized as we were tearing them apart that it was a production. Remember, in the news, let's go back to like movie bloopers and movie mistakes. The reasons why we have things like moviemistakes.com and moviebloopers.com is because movies are shot out of sequence to save money. All your desert stuff here, all the lake stuff here,
right,
and things screw up. And when you go back for reshoots and touch-ups, oh my God, they never get stuff right. But it shouldn't ever happen in the news because the news is always real time and historical events are always real time. There shouldn't be mistakes. So once the first mistakes started showing up, because now it's a social media age and we can analyze everything down to a fraction of a second in high def, now we can find everything. And NASA had a lot of back footage that we could look through. And when we did, we found a whole bunch of loose ends that should not be there.
Well, okay, let's get into, before we get into the biblical stuff, because we got to get into that as well.
Yeah.
But I'll just ask you, as one of my friends would ask you, but why though?
Oh no, that's a fair question. One out of every 10 people that email me or call me will ask me that. In fact, when I do the conference stuff, because I'm going to be doing Q&A at both the conference in Edmonton and Denver this year, that question does come up. Why?
Yeah, I mean, because it seems like, okay, most people, probably the biggest thing, once you present all these facts to them,
right?
Because I mean, again, I'm willing to have these conversations with people, and whether you believe me or believe it or not, okay, that's fine. It doesn't affect me where I'm like trying to force you to believe me, you know?
Right.
But the thing is, one of the things that constantly comes up, even after presenting, like, okay, look, this is how this works. This is how this science experiment worked. This is how this went.
Right.
This is the crappy CGI that NASA puts out. This is the Antarctic Treaty stuff. I mean, I can go on and on and tell them all these different things, but they'll say like, okay, so
what?
They'll say like, I have a family member who works for NASA.
Oh, right.
You know, or stuff like that, and they're like, and you know, she's not hiding anything. You know, like, is everybody at NASA? Is everybody at, you know, in the government? No, and they just are all covering it up. Every single person that works for NASA, even the janitor. Even the janitor is like, okay, don't tell anybody. Okay.
No. This is the exact opposite of the Manhattan Project. You know, the Manhattan Project was where the United States was trying to build the first atomic bomb, and we had places in different facilities in different parts of the country. One was up here in the Northwest, and there were hundreds of thousands of people that were working on this, mostly refining things, and they kept it a secret. This is not that. This is so big. This is so big that really less is more, and need to know it could not have a finer example in this, because it's so big it weighs on people's minds. It wears them down. It's really, really big because it changes your whole aspect of academia and science and spirituality. So does everybody at NASA know? No, of course not. In fact, it would be a very, very small contingency, which is why I always recommend the movie Capricorn 1. In Capricorn 1, only a few guys actually knew. All the wrench turners, all the people that built the rockets, all the people that wired things, they were all wiring real things. It was only the telemetry guys that knew, and only the people that hired the telemetry guys that knew. So no, very, very few, less than 1% of NASA would even have to know. Less than 1% of any government branch would have to know. I mean, does Donald Trump know? Why? Why would you tell him? Exactly. Why would you tell anybody in Congress, anybody in Senate? Now, if they find out, that's one thing. You just tell them, hey, keep a lid on it, and here's why. And if you want to threaten them, you can. But usually it's so big that they're afraid of telling people. Because it's just massive. So no, do all the scientists know this? No. Do all the people that run observatories? No, of course not. This one is very, very small, and I can't even imagine. There's probably levels of power that even would surprise me that don't know. Because why would you tell them? Unless they have to. Like even the astronauts. I think it was different. I think the Apollo astronauts knew, and then they told them Capricorn 1 style after they went through the whole training process, because I think they did want to be heroes. Everybody else after that, though, were just Air Force employees, and you make them sign the disclosure agreement and say, look, you don't even have the right to ask why. No different than anything else. It's kind of like a spy agreement, right? You're a spy. You're told to go off and assassinate somebody. You are not told why you have to do this. You're not told why you're being moved across that chessboard. You're just moving. It's above your pay grade to ask. And it also helps them act naturally. So now the astronauts, again, can sit in there in their khakis and their polo shirts and their socks and float around and throw footballs and get into gorilla suits and all this other crap that they do. And they can act perfectly, like nothing's bothering them at all. They know they're faking something. They just don't know why they're faking something. Now, they may suspect, but really, until a general comes to them and says exactly why, they can just put it out of their head and say, it's probably nothing. It's probably national security. It's probably not a big deal. So, yeah, hardly anyone.
Okay. I want to bring it up only because you brought it up.
Uh-huh.
So, what Omar found interesting, because he tends to believe that there definitely is space, is, Donald Trump announcing this whole Space Force thing, which really, I think, the first thing I asked myself, what are flat earthers going to say about this?
Yeah.
And what are their thoughts, and why would they be doing this, in your opinion, just straight up.
It's just another drumbeat. It's just getting space into a headline. That's all. When you can have the president talk about space as often as you can, that works. Meaning, of course, there's not going to be a space force. I mean, do you know how problematic that would be? Okay, first off, it's too cheesy anyway. It's a cross between Starship Troopers and the Space Marines from Aliens. With Hicks and Hudson and Vasquez. And the other reason you can't create it, I mean, he talked about kind of off the cuff, like, hey, that'd be a great idea. Maybe we'll do a Space Force. The reason why you can't do it is because no one would sign up for the other stuff. It's too cool to be a real thing. You know what I mean? Why would you join the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard? Why would you join any of those things when you could be a Space Marine or whatever Space Force is supposed to be? I can't think of, especially in this sort of technology age, no one would join anything else. That's all. Everyone would immediately sign up for the Space Force, and then you'd actually have to do something with them. And what do you mean when you're in the Space Force? Are you actually doing stuff in space? Even implying that there's a Space Force means that you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of people at one time in space doing stuff, which really, I don't want to get off on a tangent here, should have already happened. Because if you believed in the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union that just suddenly ended the second the United States got to the moon, and when have you seen this in any other competition where Russia just hung their heads and walked back, said, oh, we might as well just pack it up and quit? When does that happen? It would have gone the exact opposite. The Americans put 3, they put 4. We put 10, they make a small base. We make a bigger base, then Time magazine says the Cold War is now extended to the moon. That's how it was supposed to happen, and that's when the Space Force thing should have happened, but it didn't. Everybody quit. The Americans, the only ones who supposedly went there, and no one else even tried. That's the part that people just overlook. It's not that Russia and India and Europe and everybody else, China, it's not they didn't go to the moon. They didn't even try to put people on the moon. Even though, again, one of those hidden headlines, supposedly China's had their own little Mars rover thing on the moon for the last 3 years. But you don't see America beaming back those pictures. Why not? Because they're really, really terrible. Sorry. I get excited about this stuff.
No. You're good. That's the kind of excitement we want around here. That's fine. Good. That's no problem. No problem. No, okay. So, all right. I mean, just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Space Force is a piece of crap. There is never, ever going to happen. Ever. It's too logistically. It's almost as problematic as the Mars, sending a man to Mars. They talk about the Mars. Oh yeah, Orion Project, Mars. We're going to send people to Mars. I'm going, even if it was real, even if you could get somebody in a rocket and punch them that way, it's a one-way trip. And everyone knows this in the space industry. The problem is fuel. Even if space was real, once they get to Mars, you're stuck. There's no way you're getting back. No way. And so it's like, oh no, so when Elon Musk, that's a whole other thing. If you want to ask me about him later, that's fine. When Elon Musk says, oh yeah, we're going to colonize Mars in 2030, it's like, what are you talking about? You're not colonizing. You can't even colonize Puerto Rico at this point. You really think you're going to colonize Mars? Oh, it's awful. Remember, he already said that he was going to send 2 tourists around the moon right now, this year. He was supposed to send it around. It's like, oh, no, we got some delays. That's not going to really, even though you had no capsule, you didn't tell us who the people were. You didn't tell us who the pilots were. You didn't have a rocket. You didn't have anything. And you were going to send his... I've never seen anyone throw out headlines that are so aggressively futuristic as him. Every time he opens his mouth, it's like, how in the world? Yeah, I know you made some billions off of PayPal, and then you convinced people somehow that you created Tesla, like in your garage, even though you just bought it. You just wrote them a check. And then what was the other thing he did? Oh yeah, SpaceX. Yeah, and so everyone now he's inviting all these things.
How dare you talk about real life Tony Stark?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he was in a freaking Iron Man movie. Oh, I saw him in Iron Man 2 and was going, really? Is that's what's happening here? He's a freaking, I'm sorry, he's a fraud. He's a hack. He every time, now, I'm seriously, when I see people on YouTube and they say, oh yeah, he invented Tesla, I'm going, he did not invent Tesla. He bought it. Mark Cuban didn't invent the Dallas Mavericks. All right, Ray Kroc didn't invent McDonald's. He bought them.
Oh gosh.
Sorry.
Well, it shows you how much research people do.
Yeah, I know. I'm older, so what?
Yeah,
what
I
do
got you. You're a little bit more more
Seasoned.
into doing
Yeah.
your research. So seasoned. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the biblical stuff.
Sure.
A lot of the people, like I said, will, the first things first. As you might know, there's a lot of people that consider themselves literalist when it comes to believing the Bible.
Right.
And there's what I would say, maybe, and I don't say this to be in a mean way, there's, I believe, people that are a little bit hyper literalist, and there's literalists, and then there's like liberal believers in the Bible, and everything in between. Some people say, okay, not everything is literal, some stuff is literal, and it's always a good conversation starter between the people that believe those certain views. And one of the things that, if you're really honest and do your due diligence, and if you're a person who believes in the Bible, what does the Bible say our cosmology looks like?
Oh, are you asking me?
Yes.
I
And
believe I'll go with the Hebrew one where you have the firmament, which is the dome up above, the waters above that, however you want to define waters, the waters below, and then a underground, where's the word, realm, where all sorts of horrible things happen, and we live kind of in the middle of all that. And that the sun and the moon are part of the firmament, depending on your translation, and that I know they say the stars are actually part of the firmament. The sun and the moon may be independent, which is what I kind of believe in. So I do follow. I mean, I've compared many different cosmology, from different cultures, and the biblical one is good as any. I like it a lot. In fact, Rob Steva's version, where he called it God's footstool, where the water was actually the last defense mechanism, which I thought was brilliant. Which is, if the civilization was actually able to penetrate it, they'd just sink themselves straight out of Noah. And I even went so far in the clues, even though I did not quote chapter and verse, to cover my two favorites were, but I only covered one, was the Tower of Babel, which was the Tower of Babel. They create this structure because they're going to bridge the land and heaven, and God stopped them and changed everybody's language and scattered them around, which was very clever. But more interesting was, if the Earth is this spinning globe and it's flying around the sun, and that thing and the whole solar system is moving sideways through the galaxy at amazing speed, what exactly is the tower going to? Because if it's an infinite space, if you're just going to space, the tower is only going to go up so far, and there's just this needle on the side of a basketball that's just spinning around. And I thought that was very, very interesting. So I covered that in the clues. But my other one, which was I thought was even cooler, was, I believe, the story of Joshua, where he asked God to hold the sun and the moon in the sky for an extra day so he could slay more enemies. And if you're looking at that from a practical physics standpoint, how easy is it, if you're God, to just stop the sun and the moon in the sky? If it's this flat, if it's this domed structure, it's just part of the display system, it's like, oh yeah, I can hit pause on that, click, and it's paused. Whereas if it was actually a physical heliocentric model, the sheer forces of the physics that would be interrupted, stopping the Earth on its axis, and then stopping the Earth from rotating around the sun. I mean, it's way more difficult to do that. And you say, well, God's infinite. I'm going, yeah, but God is also efficient. So I go with the previous. I think it was easier to stop because it's all just one encased system, and he was basically just stopping or pausing a light show.
Yeah, I never really thought of that, accusing God of being inefficient. So he probably would choose the most efficient way.
Sure. I get that argument from Christians quite often, where they say, well, God's infinite. He can build a solar system. I go, yeah, but why? If 99.99% of the people down here believe in the illusion, you go with the illusion, because they already believe it's something else anyway. So why not go? Why spend all that energy and power and all that detail, plus in the Carl Sagan line, it's like, hey, there's an awful lot of empty nothingness out there. Why would you waste space? Why would you make this vast universe where there's nothing in most of it? Why not make just a very intimate world that acts like it's something else? And when I say it acts like something else, let's be literal here. God put the sun and the moon in the sky, but it was NASA that told us how big they were and how far they were away.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, NASA was the ones that really created space.
Right, and so here's the thing. Like when I read the Bible, and if I would suggest people that believe in the Bible, and really pay attention to the wording, especially when you look things up in the original language, which is something that I really suggest people to do. There's a cheaper version of a program called the Logos Bible Software, and you can basically look at the most ancient, updated translations of ancient scrolls and look it up and see what it says. And when I started looking up things about Hebrew cosmology, there would seem to be about over 200 verses in the Bible that really just point towards this an earth that does not move, an earth that's stationary. We have it all over Job. We have it in another incident where another prophet wanted proof of that God, had a message. So he asked the person's shadow to get moved. And of course that would include that would mean that God would have to move the earth backwards. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or and so that would be pretty disastrous. Given the laws of physics, if we're spinning at that speed.
Yep.
And so again, that would be that argument. Well, God can do anything. Okay, yes, but again, it's one of those things. Like I'm pretty sure God would be the most efficient decision maker. So and things like that where. God describes the earth as a footstool, himself, and he looks at us, from above, and and for those people that belong to this kind of community, I think the most interesting proof to that, because they get a lot of their extra
interview.
The fringier stuff, the fringier side of the Bible, they get that information from the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Enoch is, very detailed as to how the world looks like, or the cosmology of the world looks like, and so that itself again, explains about the sun and the moon having its chambers, and they go in and they explains the whole solar system. Explains how everything works in seasons and stuff like that, And so let's kind of stray away from that, and it's pretty safe to say that if you really do your research, the Bible says that we are definitely in this kind of snow globe enclosed system. Right. And whether you want to believe that's literal or not, that's entirely your choice, people, but that is what it says. Right. Go ahead.
And yet every pastor that I've seen and Rob Skiba will tell you this too, that has gone the other way, they pick and choose, but they really use Isaiah 40:22. He who sitteth upon the circle of the earth. They use that with veto power. That's the part that's amazing to me. It's like, okay, so all these other verses are, they point towards a flat, enclosed, stationary earth. The earth does not move. The earth is fixed, and on and on and on, including, Genesis. The first freaking chapter of Genesis talks about the firmament and the, the waters above and the waters below. And yet you're going to go to Isaiah and you're going to use that and say, nope, I'm hanging on to Isaiah, and that absolutely wipes out everything else. So really, that's what you do. If there were 10, the thing, the literal part, which is, had Isaiah said, he who sitteth upon the ball of the earth, or the sphere of the earth, or the globe of the earth, then maybe, in fact, this argument would be a lot more heated, because then
people that know Isaiah know that. Well, they probably don't know, but the word ball is used in the book of Isaiah, because they'll say that Isaiah didn't know what a ball looked like or what it was.
Yeah.
So he used circle. But if you look up in the language, you definitely do find him using the word for ball in Hebrew. And so that's not really an argument. I mean, he knew what it looked like, but he chose circle for a specific reason. You know?
What about oh geez, there's so many little things. You have to forgive me because I don't know chapter and verse probably as much as you. The great story where Satan and Christ are sitting on top of the tallest point of the mountain. He says, "Look, you can see everything from here, the entire world." And it's like, how can you see the entire world if it's a globe? You won't be able to. In fact, you'd only be able to see a small part of it. Or when during Christ's return, that every eye shall see him. Again,
Right.
and I had a guy call into a show once when I was debating that, and he says, "Well, no, with smartphones, every eye will see him." I'm going, okay. Okay. One, not everybody. Granted, we have 6 billion smartphones out there, but there's lots of people out there that still don't have smartphones or televisions or anything else. There's lots of people that don't. So you can't just lean on technology for a biblical thing for something like this. It works on a flat world. It does
Right.
not work on a globe. And there's so many. Again, Rob's website, testingtheglobe.com, which I'm so happy that he did, and I pointed. Countless people there. He goes into every one. And again, the Isaiah 40:22. It's like you cannot. I know it's, in fact, they're not hanging on to it because they believe it. They're hanging on to it because it's the only thing left to keep them from saying on the pulpit that the earth is flat. Because they're afraid, no different than the people that have interviewed me over the years.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, everybody's afraid to make Christianity look bad.
Exactly. That's it. It's like we've come so far. It's like, really, have you? Because science has been beating you over the head for some time now, and this is your chance to get back into it. But you're going to have to be bold if you're going to do it. You cannot, if you want to rest on your laurels, hey, it's fine. That's great. But this is old school. This is going back to, which is why I mentioned in the clues. I said, it was a message to all religions. I said, look, your first impulse when this thing finally hits the tipping point is to lash out, and you'll want vengeance against science because they have not been kind, especially
Right.
over the last 100 years. And it's like, look, don't do it. Don't make the same mistakes we did before. You're not going to go into the universities and burn everything to the ground. No pitchforks and torches and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's still mind blowing, and I just tell
Right.
people.
So I really respect people like, for example, Michael Heiser. He's probably pretty renowned in this kind of circles of fringe Christian community, as we've been labeled, and the reason why is because he's a scholar when it comes to the Bible and things like that, and he's at least honest. He's like, look, I don't believe it. I don't believe what the Bible says about this, but the Bible irrefutably says what it says. And then, yes, we live according to the Bible, and then the people believed that we were in this enclosed system. And I mean, if people can at least get there, I mean, that's a foot in the right direction. I think, just to be honest, it says what it says. I mean, especially, for Christians, I would say, look, just let the Bible say what it says, and don't let it affect your faith, because the Bible's message isn't about the Earth being flat or a globe. If you're concerned about that, then you're really got to reevaluate your faith there. But
Right.
but that's a different subject. But anyways, okay. So you mentioned in the beginning of the show that people maybe back in the day knew about it, you said a Spanish conquistador. People, you know what I mean?
King of Spain might have known, sure.
In your research from what you've seen, because I've definitely seen the video of Admiral Byrd, his interview he had on television.
Right.
Is that a credible source? Is that a credible video?
I think it's absolutely credible. We were lucky to get it. In fact, I stumbled upon it because I was a Hollow Earth guy. And I kind of just, in fact, nobody even owned the rights to it back in 2015. Somebody's bought the rights since then. But
Okay.
it was him going on. It was released from a CBS affiliate, and it was him going on a television show. He was between missions. They were setting up for Operation Deep Freeze, and his advanced team was already down there. And because he was the United States' greatest explorer, he'd go off around tour. People want to talk to him. And remember, this is back when there was only 3 networks. and so your television and radio time was pretty limited. But he would go around and meet people, and he was quite the celebrity. So he goes on this show called the Longines Chronoscope, which is spelled Longines, but it's pronounced Longines. And I think it was a watch company. And it was like a 60 Minutes type thing. And he goes on there, and he's, again, one of the reasons it resonated with me is because I think even the powers that be gave up looking. They were looking for the outer marker. It's like, how far out can we have to actually freaking fly? And they're flying. I mean, you go out a couple thousand miles, and it's like, okay, maybe the maps are wrong, or maybe the maps are missing. There's something else out there, but we can't find it. Screw it. We'll just make money. And that's what he was basically on television saying. Look, there's a whole bunch of countries down there. Everyone's kind of squabbling over rights. There's a mountain range made out of coal that could supply the entire world. There's oil. Right, there's uranium.
That's what I remember most out of the video. That he said that the amount of natural resources would just be so beneficial to the entire world.
Oh yeah, and remember, this was back when things were cheap, back in the 50s, really cheap. I mean, gas was 30 cents a gallon. It was, and he's still saying that. Oh yeah, this place. Plus, the best part was you didn't have to step on anything. There's no plant life, there's no animal life. It's just ice and snow. Okay, let's just do this. And that's what he was basically giving a call out to all the corporations. In fact, he was even worried. He's like, maybe it'll turn into something serious. He was actually worried that the Soviet Union and the United States were going to start squaring off over the resources. Which was kind of silly because the Cold War had barely even started at this point. And remember, because we were allies in World War II, right, and they were still rebuilding from World War II. Mm-hmm. And that's when everything changed. That was my big turning point, which was I love looking at systems, and I like looking and analyzing how things work. And this world is based on money and greed and power. Those are the big underlying factors here. We all know it. We go to war over resources, and we fight over resources, and we do just about everything we do is because we want something that somebody else has. I mean, look at every war that's ever been fought in this country. This country was not carved out of peace and goodwill. We went to war with Spain and Mexico and Britain, and who else do we have to go? Or those are the three big ones, just to get. Every time I go down to New Mexico, hang on one second. Don't move.
Sure.
Cat outside the window. It was not going to shut up. So, everything's based off of greed and power, and yet, when it came down to it, everyone abandoned that. Everybody abandoned that whole greed. I mean, it's like money all of a sudden, for whatever reason, billions and billions of dollars became irrelevant. And I knew why. As soon as I saw it, I was like, so Admiral Byrd goes on that television show, and he's talking about how everybody is, might be fighting over the resources. And then right after Operation Deep Freeze happens, they ran off that ice like they were on fire. And they not only did they run off of it, they put a big padlock. It's like, what'd you see? Like frost giants? What was out there? That scared you guys and said, yeah, nobody's ever going back there ever again. And that's what they did. And they locked it down for all time. That goes against everything that we are as a civilization, especially in the United States. It's like, really? There's something out there bigger than money? And what could that possibly be? Oh, okay. Well, the end of the world, that's possibly it. I mean, literally the end of the world. And that to me just screamed suspicious. And then, I just use that as one of the connect the dots.
Right. Well, let's go back a little bit more in time. Like I was saying, did you find any in your research people that were like from that time where we were just sailing around with boats that had interesting maps or anything like that? Because I've seen that kind of circulate the interwebs a bit, where you see like, ancient map found, and it's like a flat Earth map,
Yeah, there's a few. There was a Chinese or a Japanese map where there were which showed the AE perspective, the azimuthal equidistant perspective, and then two giant rings around it, and then continents all the size of like Africa, like 30-something continents around the outside of it, which was like from 1,000 years ago. And I thought that was really, really fascinating. As far as our explorers, no, because all the maps were so skewed. Because remember, it was tough for them to get their bearings. They really didn't, until we had aircraft. Our maps were not great. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that, because like the map that we all know and love from school, where Greenland is massive for some reason, is the Mercator map. That map's 500 years old. And even mainstream science knows that the continents are absolutely the wrong size. But it's meant for, that map was meant for, to make shipping easier, sailing. And it's like, okay, so in the more accurate projection is the Gall-Peters map. And they won't use it. It's like they so easy. All you have to do is introduce it into the schools. And for whatever reason, they won't even do that. They'd rather leave the Mercator map. It's 500 years, and more people are comfortable with the Mercator map, even though the continent size and a whole northern hemisphere versus southern hemisphere way of thinking is implied there, and that's interesting to me.
Okay. Well, let me see. I got a couple more questions, and then we'll get into the final deeper question, which is the why. We never really got into that right there.
Sure.
So let's spend some time on that towards the end right now.
Okay.
So one of the things that I saw that makes me at least question it, this whole system, is like saying, okay, one of the videos I saw that said, okay, flat Earth debunked. Check this out. There's obviously rotation in the Earth because of this. Is people were down to where it turns into the north, or where the line is like the equator.
Right. Right.
And so apparently the water flows differently.
Sure.
On that side of the equator. So like they would show a water funnel on one side, and it was turning the opposite way, and then on the other side of the equator is turning a different way.
Yep.
And they equate that to because it's the North and South Pole, and it's spinning.
Right.
And so so what are your thoughts on that exactly?
My thoughts on that fall in the line. Okay, I've got a good one for you. So there's a giant YouTube channel out there called Smarter Every Day, and it's run by not a flat earther. And he did a story, I think a year or two ago, called Toilet Water. You can look this up if you get a chance. Toilet Water Smarter Every Day, you'll find it. And because he had heard that thing too. It's like, hey, do things actually spin differently in the northern versus southern hemisphere? And he had some resources to use. So he had a counterpart down in Australia do a water test where they filled up they both had the exact same thing, a giant kiddie wading pool with a central drain. It was filled all the way to the top and had the central drain, and they were FaceTiming each other, so it's on the exact same day, and they waited until the water was absolutely dead stopped, and then to make sure they didn't disturb the water, they, instead of putting like little plastic boats or something on it, they used eyedroppers with food coloring, and they created these north, south, east, and west on there, and then they pulled the plugs in the center at the exact same time, and they were very gradual plugs. Remember, identical equipment. And he noticed that he should have seen a pretty good change, clockwise versus counterclockwise, and he didn't. It was so unbelievably gradual that he basically said, look, it was nominal. He couldn't even prove. He goes, whatever people are saying about this drain, northern versus southern, he goes, I can't see it. And they did this test more than once. And he said it's probably down to, again, it's one of those myths where people have just, for the longest time, boats go over the horizon. Oh, yeah, the drains go in different directions in the southern hemisphere. That, which is just based on how the water is going into whatever basin you're talking to, be it a sink or a toilet. And I thought that was really, really interesting, even though I know what you're going to say, the tourist thing at the equator is that they'll walk on one side of the highway or road or whatever, and you could they say, oh no, it drains this way, and they walk the other side, and it's a nice little novelty piece, but I don't believe in that. However, that being said, what I do believe in, and other flat earthers don't, is that the star trails do go clockwise versus counterclockwise at the exact equator moment. Look, I've seen the time lapse, I've seen the photographs. Anybody can take them. They can go down to the exact equator, and you can see star trails go one way clockwise versus counterclockwise, literally in the same frame on your camera. It's like, well, how could that be possible? That part is easier. Because remember, if we're talking about a giant Truman Show, if you're talking about a giant planetarium, then you're talking about the potential of multiple display systems. Meaning in a planetarium that you go to now, the Hayden Planetarium, the New York Planetarium, whatever, it's just one display system in the middle. It's rear projection, where it just fires up on the screen. But if that thing was, and we're talking not even a couple hundred yards wide, if this thing was even 10 miles wide, you'd probably have to use multiple display systems. And if it was 1,000 miles wide, you'd probably have to instance the whole thing with software, which is what we've been doing in simulations for, 15, pushing 20 years. So it does not bother me in the slightest. The water thing, I don't buy it. The sky thing, I do buy, but technically, how hard an achievement would that be? We're talking about someone that built a structure that's tens of thousands of miles wide and potentially 1,000 miles high. So why would anything they do from a technical standpoint be out of bounds?
Okay, that's kind of tied to the question I was going to ask you next, because I heard an interview one time with a person who worked, I believe he worked on that documentary called Principle.
It wasn't Robert Sagentis, was it?
I'm not sure. I don't remember his name, but I do remember the person saying like he can debunk flat Earth with one statement or something like that.
What is it?
And it's kind of basically is what you were talking on right now, because he said that on the north side,
right,
on the northern hemisphere, stars have a different rotation.
Yeah.
On the southern, they have another rotation.
And I feel bad because I actually have been in correspondence with the lead director. It's probably him. The guy that created the principle, which was Robert Sagentis, he contacted me recently, and he used a lot of the quotes that I gave him for his latest book, it's like, that's fine. It was going to happen sooner or later. But he was really, really bent out of shape, because when the principle was released was just about the time we started getting some gas in our motor. And he was really, really upset about it, because he thought we did it deliberately to submarine him, and I know, egos, but at the same time, what I was trying to tell him, and I said this in different emails, I said, look, you were already saying that the Earth was the center of the universe. That was the premise of the principle. What I was just saying is, look, you just didn't take it far enough. Meaning, you said the Earth was the center of the universe, but you still believed in space and the universe. But I knew he had to do that because he was going to talk to all these different scientists, which he did. And I thought it was a very well done film, where he got them to say that, yeah, it does appear like the Earth is the center of whatever happened in our universe. I just saying that it's condensed. It's much, much smaller. It's not this giant place. It's really a one-room structure. And I know that's a big, big leap for him to make, and he's gonna hang on to this for as long as he can. But no, sorry, the Star Trails. You got to remember, I used to play video games for a living, so I still play Warcraft, once or twice a day, just to and when you look at the sky, you understand. If you know enough developers, if you know the tech side of things, you know what can be done. The sky is easy. And for another little thing, 90-something% of the video games that are made out there, I don't care if it's a small thing, just some stupid game, or like anything from Minecraft to Warcraft, it's all based on a flat enclosed system. In fact, it's a giant box in almost all cases. Now, they make the sky to look infinite, and they make but they make the horizon perfectly flat, and that's because it's easier for the developers to do it. If the player doesn't know they're not on a globe, and you just tell them they're on the globe, and they believe it, so why would you make anything harder? Why would you build a curvature formula into a video game? You don't have to. And the same thing, expand that out to where we are now. I'm not telling you what God thinks, but I'm just saying, if the people that are here, we don't notice that there's no curve, brilliant. That's all you need to do. And then somehow it's introduced that, oh yeah, by the way, we're living on this globe that's flying through space, so don't ever look for the edge. that's even better. And that way, again, what I talked about in the clue is where people, the biggest challenge was to get people to not look for the fence, to not look for the edge. And the easiest answer was to say, there is no edge. There's no edge at all because it's a ball. You're just going to go round and round and round. And you're never, ever going to find it, even though the edge was there the entire time. It's very, very clever.
And I've heard you speak on many different kinds of interviews and different things like that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that question, like I said earlier. First of all, why do you think?
Why hide it?
Why hide it?
Yeah.
You know, why? And second, you obviously believe in a designer.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say God. I never really heard you, talk about any specific connection to any religion per se, but
Right.
but you believe in a designer and a creator,
Yeah.
and he created this place, or however you want to label him.
Yeah.
And I guess the other question is, in your opinion, if we do finally find out, like, why, in your opinion, are we here? Like, what's the point?
Ooh,
What's
okay.
going on?
Okay. The first one, yeah, because the first one's the smaller of those two questions. And I'm glad you asked the second one, because I don't get a chance to answer that one much. The first one is pretty obvious, which is they are, if you're the government, if you're the powers that be, if you're trying to keep this thing a secret, the reason you would do this is because you don't take chances with a very twitchy population. Meaning, we all saw what happened with the headlines when the Roswell thing came out in the papers, and that was just a UFO, that supposedly crashed in New Mexico, and the base commander said, "Yeah, I got a UFO. We got this thing," and the papers went freaking nuts. And remember, television wasn't even really a thing back then; it was just newspapers and radio mostly. Mm-hmm. And people got really, really pumped up about this. It was like the thing to talk about. What might happen if all of a sudden you went to the population and you said, "Hey, we've been telling you about the globe for 500 years. Yeah, it's not." Think of it. There's three things that would happen.
Yeah, that wouldn't go over well.
Potentially not. Potentially. So the obvious things, like, for example, every university in every country, the astrophysics and astronomy departments, they would shut down overnight. Their doors would not reopen in the morning. And every physical science outside of that, geology, hydrology, biology, archaeology, take your pick, all those would have to rebuild from the ground up. Literally, the textbooks would have to be rewritten. That's just academia. It would be a nightmare for academia. Second would be economic, world markets. What are the implications if the world is an enclosed system? What do people do? Do you still go to war? If you're all in the same boat, what does that what does that mean to the defense industries? What about people that want to move closer to what they think is God? Do entire congregations head out and start opening up Antarctic chapters? What happens? I mean, there are so many different industries that would be touched by this that you would have to shut down world markets, literally suspend trading for months until you could figure out exactly what everything means. I mean, even if a small war breaks out, it affects the stock market. Something like this comes out, it would be pandemonium. People wouldn't know what to do. Where do you invest your money? What's safe? What markets will emerge and what markets will die in a very, very short amount of time? Everything's pretty, even though it's chaotic and awful, it's still pretty stable, relatively stable right now. And the third, and probably the most important, is spirituality, which is the churches. All the big five religions that are out there. And yes, I was raised a born-again Christian, but my role in this is not, unfortunately, I can't wave the Christian flag in this. That's not what I am supposed to do, apparently. I'm supposed to, put it out there to everyone, and because really, how can I judge? I can't just say, look, I was raised born-again Christian, but Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, and Islam, you guys, I'm not gonna. You're not allowed to know this. Come on, I can't do that. So But think of those 5 religions that make up what most of the population, 80% of the population, in some capacity. They all now have some sort of tangible proof of intelligent design, and all of them would want to know more about this. And all of them would also look at science and say, so all that hoopla you've been giving us for the last 500 years, you've been beating us over the head with your textbooks. Yeah, you were wrong about that. So what else are you wrong about? Let's talk about evolution. Let's talk about the Big Bang Theory. Let's talk about dark matter. Let's talk about all this stuff you guys have been just flapping your gums about for all these years. You can imagine the ramifications. So if you imagine the like an X-Men, X-Files.
I mean, just people thinking about how much they've invested into these organizations.
Oh yeah. Potentially is so those things I just mentioned to you. It's the shortest New World Order meeting ever. It's like because somebody says, "Well, what's the worst that could happen, Fred?" And then Fred rattles off all this stuff, and he's going, "Yeah, we're not going to be telling anybody this until we can figure out some sort of backup plan, some sort of contingency," which is, I think, where they are now, because it was going to come out sooner or later. You were never going to be able to hide this thing forever. The technology was going to catch up, and they did stunt the technology. We still to this day we do not have the Jetsons technology. You know, where are flying cars? Where are super high-rise cities? Where's all this stuff? Nobody's got phasers. We've got some cars that can with nav system on it, and we can't even do self-driving cars right now. That's never going to happen. That's a whole nother thing. Mostly not. By the way, self-driving cars, a little tangent, not going to happen for a reason that most people miss, which is it's the insurance thing. So that lady gets run over in Phoenix, by that self-driving car.
Yeah.
Who pays for that? Exactly. Who pays? Because the driver wasn't driving, so you can't get him. Is the car manufacturer? Is the person that did the nav in the car? Is it the software developers that made the nav for that car? All insurance companies, their entire job is to not pay claims. The red tape would be forever, and that's just the first person that got killed. Imagine if a bus got hit.
Yeah, I've heard of another person sleeping on while he was driving his Tesla, or the Tesla was driving itself, and then it got into a car accident or something like that, and then he was killed or something like that. But I'm like, well, again, whose fault is that?
I'm sorry. It goes into money and power and greed rule everything, and even though self-driving cars technically are more efficient than we are, absolutely, no question. I think we would actually have less accidents. The problem is now you're asking organizations that never ever had to do this before to get into a realm which it's totally foreign to them. So what sort of insurance adjuster do you have to hire? Do you have to have our software experts now as insurance adjusters? Do you have to hire special law enforcement officers to come to the crime scene and say, okay, what did the robot do this time? It's futuristic, but there's too many people that would argue. Honestly, if you boil right down to it's the lawyer's fault. It's always the lawyer's fault. Litigation will bury us before it's over. Anyway, so to get to your last question, which is why? Forget about why was it hidden. That's easy. Why? Why would God make something like this? Why are we here? It is the quintessential question.
Before you get into that,
I
just want to give you my where I stand as far as the finale to all this.
Sure.
Because it differs quite a bit from the majority of Christians today.
Okay.
Probably not so much in this community of podcasting Christians, because they're a little bit more into the things that your average Christian won't research or look into.
Sure.
Okay? So when I read Genesis, and when I read the entirety of the Bible, and I read when I've read it through and through, and again doing the research of the language and what was the beginning and what was it supposed to be ongoing, what's the end, what's the end of all. So I see, to simplify it, I see God creating us. I see God creating this earth, put us on here. This is the realm we're meant to live in.
Mm-hmm.
All right, he gave us certain specific duties to carry on,
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to do it with autonomy, to do it with our free will, and which in a sense resembles something that he is. He is someone who does things by his choice, completely what he desires to design. He does, and he put that upon us, and that was happening during the time when we were in Eden, or our Edenic state.
Okay.
That kind of came about. Things didn't really work out. Obviously, we know about the Jesus Christ story,
Mm-hmm.
and but the story kind of changes for me when you look at it more biblically. Uh, People usually have this idea that, oh, you know, you accept Christ, and yes, there is salvation, and yes, an eternity is kind of promised within that. Not kind of, it is promised within that. But most people think you die, you go to heaven. Biblically speaking, that is not actually very biblical. Even if you've accepted Christ. So the idea is, according to the Bible, we're returning back to the original intention, to go back to Eden.
Mm-hmm.
So if you read the whole Genesis story, we had this direct connection with the Creator. There wasn't nothing in between. It's us, Him, and it was wonderful. Mm-hmm. So the idea is to return back to that Edenic state. So from what I could read is the humanity reaches to a point of enlightenment, to a point of receiving the understanding of who God is and what God has done, and we are to live in a very physical manner again on this creation that He created here on earth, not in heaven. When I think that gets a little bit confused, I believe strongly that where the God lives, the Creator, is outside of this enclosed system, outside of this earth, in this realm, you could say, and that's where He belongs, and and we will not be there with Him. The story biblically is that He will be with us, and not us up there, but Him again connected to us forever.
Yeah.
And so that's where it kind of differs. People have this kind of, usually your average Christians like, okay, we die, you accepted Christ, you go to heaven. The ones who don't, they go to hell, and that's another thing that differs slightly as well. And I wouldn't get into that one so much because that's a very long conversation as to why I believe, what I believe when it comes to hell, but it's also different, and I believe it's something that the Bible is a little bit more accurate. And then obviously it's not just me; it's coming from the sources, of course, that are academics in this kind of study. But my point being is, there's the end story is the unification of humanity, but not just the unification of us, but also the unification of us together, and also us to God,
Right.
And I think that's where it's leading to. You can kind of, put whatever, for those Christians out there, whatever things in between, well, this or that, and then that's fine. But when you really just boil it down, and let's in a sense do away with all the religious terminology, I believe that there's going to be, biblically speaking, this reunification of humans, and we're going to be in the state of awareness that we should have been in the first place, that we've lost over time because of the powers that be and evil forces and such. And the redemption story is going to redeem even those things, the lost knowledge, the hidden knowledge,
Right.
And so that's kind of where I stand, just to give you kind of a platform, as to where you believe.
No, it's good.
You know?
I think it's probably more eloquent than what I was going to present, which was, because remember, I'm trying to boil it down for just about anybody, which is when I looked at this world initially, when I was trying to figure out, okay, how do you hide it and how was it built, and trying to look into not necessarily the mind of God, but the little design things, the subtle genius that was in just about everything, and not going into the how people were built and the biology of all living things and all that, but little things like adding a 3% salt solution to the oceans, and what that does is limit the exploration travel by 90-something%, because you can't drink what you're sailing on, which was the limit of, which is why most of your sailing trips had to be cut short, because they ran out of fresh water. little things like that, or how the weather systems move in a circle around that. But as far as why, I think you're right on just about every point there. When I looked at it, I tried to use more general terms. So, because the world can only be really one of three things. It can either be entertainment, and I don't think that's it, because if it was, a lot more people would be having a good time. It seems to be very, very conflicted. In fact, most people aren't having a good time. They're not having fun at all, as a matter of fact. But at the same time, the second thing would be confinement. If it's a prison, it's an awfully nice prison. There's some really, really cool things here. The natural processes of this world work absolutely flawlessly without us. You know, if you took humans off of this place, it would just run great all the time. And you know, because there's not to steal from the Matrix, but that great line that Agent Smith said, where he said that every other life form on this planet, I know you use the word planet, develops a natural equilibrium with its surrounding environment, and human beings do not. There's the exact opposite. They just consume and consume, and then they spread to another area. But if it's a prison, it doesn't feel like we're being punished necessarily. It doesn't feel like confinement. What it felt like more than anything, the third part, was education, which is it kind of felt like a school when I was looking at how it was built. And that is, yeah, sometimes you have a little fun. Most of the time you're doing busy work, but all the time you're being shown things that you're supposed to be learning. And that was it. It's like, look, this is an education process. You're supposed to be learning things. And one of the biggest things you're supposed to be learning is perspective, which is one of the oldest questions of the book, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, is the question that people would ask God if God all of a sudden showed up. And I always disagree with the question, which is, why do you let bad things happen to good people? And I have an answer for that. And it's usually from a strategy standpoint, which is, if bad things didn't happen to good people, then no one would be bad. Meaning they would see it as an exploit. Meaning you can't have, in fact, The Simpsons did a wonderful Ned Flanders episode where all these bad things happened to Ned during like this month. It's like his house burned down and all this crap. And that's because up until then, it was like nothing ever bad happened to Ned, because he was a God-fearing Christian and, you know, would always give God credit at all times. But you know full well, bad things happen to Christians all the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
And one of the big reasons is because if that wasn't allowed, if it was an absolute, everyone would become Christians. Like, hey, you know, nothing bad's happened to Christian. Oh yeah, I'm going to be a Christian too. It wouldn't be sincere. It is about free will. It is about making the choices. And the other thing is that you can't appreciate a beautiful, perfect world until you spend time in a place that's not perfect. This world, if it is nothing else, it is 99% conflict. It doesn't matter how beautiful you are, how powerful, how wealthy, how talented. Everybody complains about something. Nobody is you know, you very rarely do you run into somebody who, yeah, says, hey, how things are going? Everything is blissful and wonderful all the time. You know, when do you hear that? No, it's like was it Getty, that one of the early United States millionaires, or back when millionaire meant something, where he had a 110-room mansion, and he ripped out all the frickin' phones and put payphones in the hallways because he hated his guests making long-distance calls. He could afford it. It didn't matter. It bugged him. You know, you get used to a certain thing. It's like getting used to a hot tub. You know, once you get used to it, well, your attention's going to be focused on other things, and that's what I think this world is. You know, the conflict is inescapable, and I think that's because outside of here, yes, there is a blissful, wonderful, and if it is God coming down here and remaking the world to be perfect, hey, great, fantastic. You know, I'm not against that. But that's what it feels like to me, is that we're supposed to be learning things here. And it's a school. It's an education system. It is a teaching facility. And lots of people you know, choose to ignore it. And as you know, going through school, there's a lot of bad students. But eventually people do learn something here and there. And if they have to, if it's remedial and they have to go through it again, hey, you know what? You're probably going through it again. Either sooner or later, you're gonna pick up the messages that are being put out. So that's my kind of meandering way of saying that.
Yeah, no, no, not at all. No, that's it's good. Like I said, um, I believe if you read the Bible, it's not just a how to, but how to do things, but also how not to do things, because it's a history book of how bad humanity could be. And
Sure.
one of the complaints that you hear a lot from people that are not necessarily religious in any manner is like, look how gory, look how violent the Bible is, and I'm like, yeah, well, it's primarily about human history. So
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
it's not an AOL Time Warner Disney production. I mean, it is not sanitized for your protection. The
Mhm.
Bible is about as gritty as they get, considering what year it was made.
Indeed, indeed. So okay, that answers my questions. I'm sure
Okay.
there's some people listening like, oh, he didn't ask about this, he didn't ask about that,
There's
but
so many questions.
there there's so much information on this, and,
Yeah.
and, and I challenge people like, look, in the end, both me and Omar, we hold everything with an open hand. We're more than you know okay with like, oh, I'm a Christian, and I believe in this now. Well, that's fine. We can have any conversation.
Right.
We just always advise people to really do your due diligence, and especially when it comes to matters like these, don't write it off so quickly,
Right.
and find out actually how important things can be something like this, because that's probably one of the biggest things as well, as people think, well, this is unimportant. But it ties to so many things, like you said. It ties to mm, makes you understand about the corruption
Oh yeah.
of the powers that be, and
Yeah.
it makes you understand how it can affect humanity just on a day-to-day basis. It makes you understand the importance of spirituality, and
Yeah.
people don't think that if that it'll affect you psychologically. Like, how would you? I think you said it best. How would you act if you knew you were being watched by
Right.
somebody?
Right.
I
Yeah,
think that's
would you
very
still be making the free will choices that you normally would? Yeah, the traffic stop argument, which is
right.
you run through an intersection and then they install a camera at that intersection. You don't run through it anymore. Why not?
Right.
Well, because I'm being watched. Well, says something, doesn't it?
Indeed. And so if everybody found out, like, oh my gosh, this is some giant terrarium,
Yeah.
that means obviously someone designed it. That means there is a designer, and that means he is watching,
Yeah.
And so I think people will definitely think a lot different. And I also want to just advise people that, hey, especially if you're Christian, and I hear this a lot, just to be careful that you have your faith grounded in what the story is about, and what God has called you to do with other people, to be loving, to be compassionate, to be imagers of God. And Jesus, in many ways, set the example of. Okay, so I think I finished my statement, and then it disconnected or something. So,
You were close. So,
yeah.
anything else?
Okay, let's start from there. Let's see. Okay, got you back. Lost you there for a moment, Mark. So that was weird. I'm having some internet issues over
No
here.
worries.
But anyways, I think I summed it up pretty well. And so, anything you want to just mention, or want to just kind of get off that your chest that you didn't really bring up, and you said, "Oh, I wish you would have asked about this," or something like that.
No. I thought they were great questions. What I'd just like to put forward to the listeners is that, look, I'm not here to convince you. I'm not even here to persuade you. I am just putting the seed out there that there's something going on, something new, and yet something very, very old, and it's exciting, and I'm just humbled to be a part of it. And every day wonder where it's going, but it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and weirder, and very exciting.
Right. So you mentioned, just to kind of bring this up because it's coming up pretty soon, and you and my friend Nate, who used to be on our show, went with Nat Geo, I believe, right?
Yeah, National Geographic down to,
And
yeah.
what were you guys doing? And I believe something else like that is coming up again.
Yeah, so we went down to the Salton Sea because there was a little skeptics group down in Los Angeles called the IIG. I think it's the Independent Investigators Group, and they were trying to prove the curvature of the Earth, and so they invited us out to the Salton Sea, and I didn't want to go, but National Geographic was looking for a story, and so, long story short, we all got together and we spent some time out there, and the test was horrible. They shot it over a very, very warm body of water, which we don't do anymore. And because of that, the flat Earth community was outraged, and we're going to go back at nighttime and shoot it again on our own terms and show them that the curvature actually isn't there. What they thought was the curvature was merely heat distortion, and we've been doing this test more or less nonstop for 3 years, culminating in a 40-kilometer test out on a lake in Hungary that was sanctioned by the Guinness Book of World Records, and it was a 100-page thing on it, which I'll send to anybody who wants it. It's not exactly like reading, but it showed what we thought. As look, there's no visible curvature anywhere, and these guys are going to be doing it this coming Wednesday.
Well, that's crazy. That's really cool. I remember. I think Nate has his own YouTube channel, and he posted something that he thought was interesting. I guess they apparently found him when they
They again, because it was the first time they've ever done this test, and we've done it many times.
Right.
They forgot that when you're shooting over long distances, you've got to have some sort of landmarks, otherwise you're not going to know where your people are. Right. And they were looking in the wrong place, and we came back and we're looking with our cameras, and we saw the balloons at the beach level, and we said, oh no, they're right over there. And they were actually giving us grief, saying it was like, no, you can't be looking. You can't possibly see the balloons on the beach because they're on the other side of the curve. It's really? It's like, so we're not seeing what we're seeing. It's not actually there. And so when you point the cameras where we tell you to point, you didn't see what you. Yeah, it was ridiculous. The denial is strong.
I thought that was interesting. I think Nate was there doing the whole thing with them, and he ended up guiding them to finding them.
Without us, the test would have never happened.
Yeah, they were surprised, like, oh, he is there. Yeah. And furthermore, like you said, they were the balloons were supposed to extend up, and they weren't even extended.
No, they were still putting them together on the beach, and we shouldn't have seen it then. In fact, if we would have shot those cameras even an hour earlier, because we were losing visibility with every 30 minutes because the heat, we're talking Salton Sea. It was 105 degrees there that day. It just keeps getting warmer and warmer. If they would have shot when they were supposed to at 5 in the morning, they would have seen it. I mean, I saw the lights. When I got to the beach, I saw the lights on the other buildings 9 miles away. And yet, once the heat got up, we couldn't even see the buildings because, the distortion field just kept getting higher and higher. And I'm pointing this out to National Geographic. I'm going, look, there's a mountain range in the distance. It now looks like it's an island. How do you explain this? This test is completely invalid, but they're going to spin it any way they want.
Right. Yeah. Alrighty then. Well, I think we covered, not even close to all the things that we could talk about this subject, but we'll post some links and anything that people want to get a hold of. Anything you have that you want to plug, like what you got going on or anything like that?
Just go type in Flat Earth Clues into either Google or YouTube, and you'll find me. My channel's just my name, Mark Sargent. But again, it's about the community. So type in Flat Earth in YouTube and just start going through pages after. There's so much content out there. I envy anyone who's getting into this for the first time because there's just a wall of material you'll have to go through.
Right. Yeah, there is definitely. I mean, just from when I started looking into it until now, it's like I don't even have to finish typing it. I just put FL. Yeah. And then it just goes Flat Earth. Like there's just so many different videos.
It's everywhere. Trust me when I say this. There are people that that are into Flat Earth, but they won't say it. They're walking around you. We walk among you right now.
I'm gonna have to get one of those glasses that reveal the true nature of you.
Yeah, from They Live. Yeah.
Yeah, from They Live, and see who Flat Earthers are.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny. All right, man. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, Mark. Stick around. I'm gonna play some music for the folks, and we'll talk a little bit after the show.
All right, man.